The Bruins didn't die because they were hopeless. That would have been cleaner. They died because they were good enough to keep convincing you there was still a series in there somewhere. They had David Pasternak. They had Jeremy Swayman. They had enough Boston Bruins residue left on the sweater that you could talk yourself into one more push, one more ugly win, one more night where the other team started to feel the room tighten. And then they'd give you a period like Game 4. And that's the whole autopsy, really. This wasn't a bad team, and it wasn't a team that couldn't stay structurally sound once Buffalo started to lean on it. Welcome to Postmortem. Today's file: Boston Bruins, cause of death, structural integrity under playoffs pressure. Boston had pieces. It had pride. It had a 100-point regular season and a superstar who could still scare the hell out of a series. But when the Sabres made this fast, uncomfortable, and mean, the Bruins didn't have enough answers that weren't named David Pasternak. The first symptom was the gap between the record and the feeling. 100 points should probably mean comfort. It should mean stability. It should mean you're not apologizing for the body before it even gets on the table. But the Bruins never felt as solid as the number suggested. They were good. Let's not overcorrect and pretend they weren't. Pasternak was still Pasternak. Swayman was still capable of giving them winning goaltending. Charlie McAvoy still gave the blue line a real anchor. Morgan Geekie gave them more offense than you could have reasonably asked for. And Marco Sturm got a playoff season out of this group in his first year behind the bench. All that's real. But the regular season kept leaving little notes under the door. There were nights when Boston looked like a playoff team with an actual plan. Then there were nights when the whole thing got weirdly soft. Not lazy, not exactly, just unstable. The exits got messy. The middle of the ice opens up, and the Bruins start chasing. Once they started chasing, they stopped looking like the Bruins. That matters with this franchise. Boston's whole thing, for years, has been that the other team eventually has to play Bruins hockey. Even when the roster changes and when the names move on, the sweater's supposed to mean something. It's supposed to come with a certain amount of bad news. This version still had the sweater. They just didn't always have the squeeze. And Buffalo found that out. The second symptom was speed. The Sabres made Boston defend in a way Boston didn't want to. They turned shifts into foot races. They made the Bruins handle pressure before they were fully set. And they pushed pace into the soft parts of Boston's roster and asked a very simple question: can you keep doing this? Too often the answer was no. And that doesn't mean Buffalo is some flawless machine. They weren't, but they had enough juice to make the Bruins uncomfortable. Once Boston got a little uncomfortable, you could see the difference between having experienced players and having a team that's actually composed. That's not always the same thing. Experience is having been here before. Composure is still making the right play when the series starts yelling at you. And Boston had the experience. Buffalo attacked the composure. Game 4 is where the thing really started to go from concerning to diagnostic, because 4 goals in the first period at home in the playoffs. It's not really what I'd classify as a bad start. That's the kind of period that changes how you talk about a team. Peyton Krebs, Josh Doan, Zach Benson, and Bowen Byram all got one. All of a sudden, TD Garden didn't feel like TD Garden. It felt like a room full of people watching the same uncomfortable thing happen at the same time. Swayman took the damage. Korpisalo had to come in. Sean Curley eventually puts Boston on the board. But by that, it's not a comeback. It's just a notation. Final was Sabres 6, Bruins 1. And that was the time of death, even if it was 2 games ago. Even if the paperwork wasn't signed yet. Not because the series wasn't literally over. It wasn't. Boston still had a pulse. But Game 4 told you the problem in plain English. The Bruins can still play good hockey. They just can't reliably stop the game from becoming bad hockey. That's a fatal flaw in April, because playoff hockey isn't about your best 5 minutes, because everybody has 5 minutes. Bad teams can have 5 minutes. Dead teams have 5 minutes. The question is whether you can survive the stretch where the other team starts to get greedy. Boston couldn't survive Buffalo getting greedy. Symptom 3, too much of the offense had to pass through Pasternak. And look, that's what superstars are for. No one's going to apologize for having David Pasternak. He's the reason the series still had oxygen. He's the reason Buffalo couldn't just put the thing away without checking every door twice. But when your best answer is always the same answer, the other team eventually builds its whole defense around that answer. And Pasternak could still break through. He did in Game 5. That overtime goal was Boston at its most seductive. That was the version of the Bruins that makes you think, okay, maybe there's still something here. Maybe this is where the Bruins take over. This is where the series tilts. Maybe Buffalo had its chance and left Boston alive too long. That's the false hope. And to be clear, false hope doesn't mean fake. That Game 5 victory was real. Pasternak really did extend the season. Swayman gave him enough. The Bruins dragged the series forward. But false hope is what happens when one great night tells you to ignore the deeper problem for another 24 hours. Boston got the moment. They didn't get the correction. And that's the difference. Fourth symptom was the margin getting thin at the worst possible time. Victor Arvidsson going down matters here. He wasn't the entire offense, and he wasn't the whole identity, but he was one of the players who could give Boston just a little bite, a little pace, a little irritation, a little middle six usefulness in a series where usefulness was starting to get just a bit scarce when you're already asking too much of the top of the roster. Losing a player like that isn't just, hey, next man up. Sometimes it's your next problem just got exposed, and that's where Boston was. They needed secondary scoring and cleaner defensive zone exits. They needed the defense to hold up under speed. They needed Swayman to be excellent, not just good. They needed him to be special, damn near perfect. And then they needed enough other players to make Buffalo defend more than just one great idea. Because too often Boston had one idea, just one main idea. And that's how a team can look dangerous and limit themselves at the same time. The official time of death was Game 4, but the final paperwork is in Game 6. Game 5 gave the Bruins one last really good paragraph. But Game 4 wrote the report. That first period was the evidence. That's where the building saw the shape of the problem. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. A team that's truly built for a long playoff run doesn't just need stars. It needs automatic responses. The puck goes here. The pressure gets absorbed there. The third line buys 2 shifts. The defense slows the room down. The goalie makes the save that turns panic back into structure. Boston didn't have enough of those automatic responses. Sure, they had effort, history, and Pasternak. But when Buffalo got rolling, Boston had to negotiate with the game instead of controlling it. And that was a bad place for them to be. Okay, so let's get into what survives. Pasternak, obviously. Pasternak is still the bridge from what the Bruins were to whatever they become next. He's still a nightmare. He's still the player that opponents have to discuss before they discuss anything else. Long as he's there, Boston's never going to be irrelevant. Swayman survives, but the conversation around it gets just a little more complicated. Not because he's bad. He's not bad. He's not. But once you're paid and treated like a franchise goalie, the question changes. It's not, can he win the games? Of course he can. The question is whether he can stabilize a team that's starting to crack in front of him. And that's a much harder job. McAvoy survives as part of the spine. Hampus Lindholm survives if the body cooperates. Geekie survives as one of the best developments of the season. Elias Lindholm survives as a useful piece, although Boston probably still needs more from the center of the ice if this is going to become a real contender again. Marco Sturm survives too. I don't think you can look at the season and say, this coach failed. Getting this team to 100 points mattered. Keeping the room from sliding matters. There's enough here to say he deserves more runway. But the Bruins front office can't confuse still pretty good with, hey, we're close enough. And that's a trap. This franchise has spent a long time being able to talk itself into contention because it had Bergeron, Marchand, Chara, Rask, Krejci, McAvoy, Pasternak, whatever version of the core you want to use. There's always another reason to believe the Bruins are sturdier than the other guys. And this team didn't assume that assumption. It earned respect, And it didn't earn fear. It earned respect. That's the distinction and the offseason question. How do the Bruins get back to being feared? Not respected, not a tough out. Fear, because there's a difference between a team nobody wants to play and a team nobody wants to finish off because the brand still makes them nervous. Boston was closer to the second one this time, unfortunately for them. The Bruins gave their fans enough to care about and not enough to trust. That's a brutal place to live. They were never embarrassing and never empty. They had real nights, real players, real wins. They still have a real superstar standing right in the middle of it all. This isn't a team wandering around with no pulse. But it's also not the old Bruins. The old Bruins made the ice feel smaller. This team too often made its own options feel smaller. When the Sabres sped the game up, Boston didn't consistently slow it back down. And when it got uncomfortable, the Bruins didn't make it uncomfortable in return. And when Game 4 started slipping, it didn't just slip, it busted open. And that's the image that sticks with me. Not Pasternak's overtime goal, even though that was great. Not the 100 points, even though they all count, every last one of them. The image is Boston at home, chasing a game that had already gotten away from them, while Buffalo looked younger, faster, and a lot less interested in the Bruins' reputation. That's where the season died. Not because the Bruins were nothing, because they were something. They were just not enough. Final ruling: Boston Bruins cause of death, structural instability under playoff pressure, with complications from thin secondary scoring, home ice failure, and an over-reliance on superstar rescue. The regular season held. The series didn't. Thanks for watching.